Reciprocal tariffs, which come into effect at midnight. We're now joined by BUSA CEO Khulekani Mathe. Good afternoon, Mr. Mathe. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let's first start with your reaction to news that President Cyril Ramaphosa held that phone call with President Donald Trump yesterday on bilateral relations. Does this continued effort to keep communication channels on a better trade framework inspire confidence, or perhaps it's indicative of a government that put all its eggs in one basket and neglected the diversification program?
Good afternoon, and our view is that the call by our president to President Trump can only be a good thing, because we do need to keep the channels of communication open between our country and the United States. So hopefully, he charms Mr. Trump into at least be open to further negotiations of a better deal for us. So we are fully supportive of that.
Now, a bit earlier in the program, we were speaking to the chair of South Africa's BRICS Business Council, Mr. Nicolau, and among the issues he felt needed addressing as a start was the data on the exact impact that this 30% tariff would have on business, because he says certain sectors, at least for him, he feels there's somewhat of an exaggeration of the impact. So figure-wise, he believes that proper figures are needed to allow the country to adequately respond to this new reality. Where do you stand around the figures? Do you believe we actually have proper data to work with?
Look, we may not have accurate data to the T, but if we use the data that tells us how much we as a country trade with the United States, that's a start, a global figure. And then you segment that by sector, how much each sector trades with the US. That gives you an indication of what an impact we're likely to have. And yes, as a global figure, this might not seem like a big number, but we know that in certain sectors, the impact of this will be devastating. Sectors such as agriculture, sectors such as the auto industry, and parts of other manufacturing will be devastated by these tariffs that have been imposed. And so we don't think it's negligible, because there will be jobs in the order of anything up to 30,000 jobs that are likely to be affected now in an economy that has high levels of unemployment already. And that is significant.
Now, there's a nondescript package that we've been hearing of. Just a bit earlier on, we even had cabinet outcomes where Minister Ntshavheni was engaged on this specific one because it's the most important currently. Now, they were speaking of this nondescript interventional package that would support the key sectors. Business, among others, being told of an export support desk. Support of what kind at this point is not necessarily clear. Do you believe we're treating this matter as a crisis that it possibly could be?
I would agree with you that it is a crisis. As I've said, anything that threatens 30,000 jobs in South Africa, anything that threatens to shave off 0.2% of GDP growth this year has to be treated as a crisis, because we are in an economy that is, as it is, growing under 1%. So it should be treated as a crisis, absolutely, which is why we support the call, by the way, made by our colleague BUSA Khulekani in her newsletter earlier this week, where she says that in the same way that the president convened a crisis committee to deal with energy, a crisis committee to deal with logistics and transport, we should be thinking along the lines of establishing a crisis committee to look at these trade issues, because it has the external aspect to it, which is, can we still negotiate a better deal? Even that would require that we pull together our best negotiating resources. And a second part to it is, if we fail, what package, how do we provide support to affected industries? And that would need us to put our heads together. It's not something that anybody can do alone.
Now, many are talking about the need to have a broader conversation now around diversification. But correct me if I'm wrong. If we're talking diversification here, it takes time. You need to cultivate this export. You need to create, you must conduct research beyond that. Then you create these distribution networks. It's not something that can happen overnight because we've got tariffs that come into effect at midnight. Are we not late even with just that conversation, in as much as it must be had? But is there an appreciation that if you're talking diversification, it's cultivated? You need to create those distribution channels after research is conducted as well.
You are absolutely right that it takes a while to develop new markets. And even if a trade deal is signed today, for instance, with a new market altogether, to build those transport networks and so on, to write the rules, because rules need to be written of how goods land on the other side, etc. That takes a long time. And so it's not as though we can flip and just switch from the US to any other market for that matter. So we do have to start today in instances where we haven't started to look at these alternative markets. So this is not an argument to say we shouldn't, but the point is it's not an immediate solution, which is why we should do our best to try and preserve our access to the US market.
Mm-hmm. And then how can we leverage off our BRICS membership? Because surely even there, it provides access to a wider market, but one wonders if we've actually fully somehow realized the potential that it has always presented.
I think you're right as well that we haven't utilized the full extent of the opportunities from our BRICS membership, and so this is something that we certainly can and should look at optimizing. Facing the situation that we're currently facing. So I fully agree with you there.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you just actually clarified the point that for those that think perhaps it's now time to do away with the whole communication with the US, that it's not as easy as said than done, that we might perhaps need to preserve that relationship, because when it comes to diversification, it really just doesn't happen overnight. After midnight tonight, there will be no markets. They can start exploring, but there are no markets to export to if you're a business that actually wants to get your products out there. But thank you very much for your insights this afternoon.